The invitation that broke her heart. Adriana Lewis sat frozen on the edge of her twin-sized bed, fingers curled around a pearl-white envelope that still smelled faintly of roses. Her hands trembled as she read the gold-embossed invitation for the third time, the same way one rereads a verdict, hoping it would change. The words hadn't, if anything, they pierced deeper each time. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Thomas Avery and Liliana Grace." And then, as if salt to a wound, "Maid of Honor, Adriana Lewis." Her name stood there, elegant, celebrated, but hollow. Because the groom, Thomas, wasn't just anyone. He was her best friend since third grade. He was the man she once told herself she'd marry. And Liliana, she was her college roommate, the woman she had introduced to Thomas at a New Year's Eve party 2 years ago. A drunken kiss between strangers had evolved into a love story. And Adriana, she had watched it all happen, quietly, painfully. The apartment around her seemed smaller that evening, like the walls themselves were leaning in to press on her chest. The sun dipped below the Chicago skyline, bleeding pink and gold through her curtains, casting shadows across the paintings she had done over the years, scenes of forests, city alleys, and stormy oceans, all windows to a world she often escaped to when reality became unbearable. This was one of those times. Adriana had always been the quiet dreamer, a freelance illustrator with a loyal list of indie publishers and children's authors, scraping by with commissions and late-night coffee-fueled deadlines. She didn't crave the spotlight, but Thomas had always brought it to her with his energy, his laughter, and his undivided loyalty. Or so she thought. She remembered it all too well, how they'd first met in the school library when she was 8, curled up in the corner sketching unicorns in her notebook. Thomas, wild-haired and reckless, crashed into her world chasing a runaway paper airplane. He'd apologized a dozen times and then asked if he could keep the unicorn drawing in exchange for his paper plane. That trade had started everything. A bond that withstood childhood heartbreaks, high school drama, and even the distance that came with college. When her mother died unexpectedly in their sophomore year, Thomas skipped his exams just to fly cross-country and be at the funeral. She de-leaned on his shoulder and cried until there were no more tears left. It wasn't just friendship. Not for her. Adriana fell quietly, the way ink spreads on a wet page. She never told him, not because she didn't have chances, but because he was happy. And happiness was something she never wanted to steal from him. Then Liliana entered the picture with her caramel blonde hair and infectious laugh, and suddenly Thomas looked at someone else the way Adriana used to dream he'd look at her. Now, staring at the invitation, her stomach turned with nausea. Was it betrayal to feel this way? To want to disappear on the day she was expected to stand beside them, smile in the photos, and raise a glass in toast to their forever? Her phone vibrated, breaking the silence. The screen lit up with a name that still warmed her even when it shouldn't: Thomas. "Hey," came his voice, familiar, warm, gentle, like a song she'd known by heart. "Did you get the invite?" She swallowed. "Yeah, I did." "I know it's weird. I mean, we always talked about this moment like it would be a joke, you as my best man or me sneaking shots with you behind the reception stage." He chuckled. "But I couldn't imagine that day without you." "Liliana agrees. Your family, Adri. Please say you'll be my maid of honor." Adriana's eyes filled again, but her voice betrayed none of it. "Of course I will," she whispered. "Wouldn't miss it." That night, sleep did not come. She sat at her desk staring at a blank sketchpad, trying to draw anything that didn't feel like heartbreak. But all that came was a figure standing in the rain, clutching an umbrella that didn't open. It was raw and messy, and somehow honest. The next few weeks passed in a blur of wedding meetings, dress trials, and group chats full of champagne emojis and Pinterest boards. Liliana was every inch the radiant bride, planning every detail down to the napkin colors. Adriana played her part. She laughed. She posed for photos. She helped pick flower arrangements, all while pretending she didn't want to scream into the sea. Thomas was busy launching a new expansion of his tech company, doing press, and being pulled in a dozen directions. But whenever they had a moment, he'd pull her aside, grinning like that schoolboy with the paper airplane. "You okay?" he'd ask. "Promise me you're okay." And she always nodded, because how could she not be okay when the man she loved had no idea he held her heart in the palm of his hand? One evening, as the sun set outside Liliana's family's lake house, the venue for the wedding, Adriana sat by the water sketching, her feet dangling in the cold lake. She heard footsteps behind her. "Thought I'd find you here," Thomas said, sitting beside her. He looked exhausted. "You always retreat to water when you need space." She smiled without looking at him. "And you always follow." There was a pause before he said, I don't want you to feel like you're being pushed aside. You matter to me, Adri, always have. She finally turned to him. Then why didn't you ever? He looked confused. Didn't I ever what? But she shook her head. Never mind. He nudged her shoulder. You're the only person who's seen me at my worst and still stayed. That means something. It meant everything, she whispered, barely audible. He didn't hear, or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. Either way, the moment passed. The night before the wedding, Adriana stood in front of the long mirror in the guest room, the bridesmaid gown hanging beside her. Soft lilac, delicate, beautiful, it was everything Liliana was. Adriana stared at her reflection, wondering when she had become the kind of woman who let love slip through her fingers. She hadn't told him. She'd had 1,000 moments, and she'd chosen silence every time. Tomorrow she would watch him marry someone else. Tomorrow she'd smile and hand over the rings, and maybe, if she didn't break, she'd raise her glass with the rest of them. But tonight was hers. She took out her journal and began writing the letter she'd never send. Dear Thomas, beneath the surface, the storm. The wedding day began with birdsong and sunlight spilling through tall windows, a golden hush over the lake house estate that seemed almost too serene for the war unraveling inside Adriana Lewis's chest. She had barely slept. Her hands, which usually held pencils and brushes with steadiness and intention, now fumbled to clasp the delicate chain of her necklace, her reflection blinking back at her in the antique mirror with a gaze she barely recognized. Her lips curved into a practiced smile, one she had spent years perfecting, one that fooled the world. But her eyes, they betrayed everything. Behind the lavender silk of her gown, beneath the rose-tinted blush, and beyond the perfected poise she now wore like armor, Adriana was drowning in silence, in the weight of her unsaid truth, in the realization that this day, this wedding, would permanently etch her heartbreak into memory. The bridal suite was buzzing with laughter, perfume, and the sound of hairdryers. Bridesmaids floated in and out, glasses of mimosa in hand, phones snapping photos every minute. Adriana sat on the window seat, legs tucked beneath her, sketching on a napkin with eyeliner. It was the only way she knew to breathe through art, but even that betrayed her today. The lines came out hesitant, unbalanced, unsure. Across the room, Liliana stood radiant in a gown that shimmered like water under moonlight. She looked every inch the cover of a wedding magazine, graceful, polished, and sure. Watching her laugh with the makeup artist, Adriana wondered how it was possible to love and envy someone in equal measure, to root for their happiness while mourning your own. Liliana turned and beamed. Adri, come take a picture with me, you're glowing. Adriana rose, adjusting her dress. That's the blush, she said, managing a laugh. They posed together, arms wrapped tightly, but the closeness stung. Liliana didn't know. She had no idea that the woman standing beside her, the woman who had helped her pick the venue, plan the playlist, and tie each guest's welcome bag, had once imagined this day as her own, had whispered the groom's name into her pillow on stormy nights, had memorized the sound of his laugh like it was oxygen. And yet here they were, smiling for the camera, preserving a moment neither would ever forget. As the bridal suite cleared out, bridesmaids heading downstairs for final seating instructions, Liliana lingered by the mirror, her fingers trembling slightly. Adriana noticed. You okay? She asked, gently approaching. Liliana bit her lip. I am, it's just nerves. You know, when everything is perfect and you suddenly wonder if it's too perfect to be real. Adriana paused. Do you love him? Liliana blinked, surprised. Of course I do. Why would you ask that? But Adriana didn't answer. She just nodded and straightened the veil. Then you've got nothing to worry about. The words tasted like betrayal. Not because they were untrue, but because they were incomplete. Because somewhere deep inside, she wasn't just trying to reassure the bride. She was trying to convince herself that this was right, that letting go was right, that losing Thomas in silence was the only choice left. Downstairs, the ceremony space was a dream pulled from a fairy tale. Rows of ivory chairs faced an arch adorned with cascading orchids and vines, the lake glistening just beyond it. Guests in pastel dresses and tailored suits whispered behind programs, the excitement humming in the air like electricity before a storm. Adriana stood with the groomsmen, the officiant giving instructions she barely registered. Her eyes were locked on Thomas. He stood at the altar, straightening his cufflinks, then running a hand through his thick chestnut hair the way he always did when nervous. And for a moment he looked up, and their eyes met. Something flickered there, something unspoken, ancient, painful. He smiled at her, soft, grateful, warm. The kind of smile that had once made her believe the universe had written his name next to hers. But today it was a farewell. The music began, everyone rose. Liliana appeared at the top of the stairs, escorted by her father, her smile wide and perfect. Thomas turned, and as his eyes filled with emotion, Adriana looked away. She could not watch the moment he gave his heart to someone else, not without breaking. The ceremony moved in snapshots. Vows, tears, laughter. Adriana heard none of it. She was underwater, caught in a riptide of memories, his arms around her after her father's funeral. The birthday card he made her by hand during their broke college years. The time he told her, "You're the only person who really sees me." How cruel that the one who saw him most clearly had been rendered invisible. When the officiant declared, "You may now kiss the bride," Adriana's chest collapsed. The world around her clapped, cheered. But she felt as if she were the only one left standing in a field after a war, surrounded by smoke and silence. She tried to disappear into the crowd, but Thomas caught her arm gently as she passed. "Don't go yet," he said, eyes searching hers. "Please, can we talk after the reception?" She nodded, of course, she always did. The reception was elegant, golden lights strung across the garden, jazz music playing, and laughter echoing across champagne glasses. Adriana drifted through it like a ghost, congratulating strangers, avoiding the head table, keeping her distance, until the best man clinked his glass for a toast. "To love," he said, raising his champagne, "and to the kind of friendship that lasts longer than even the sharpest heartbreak." Adriana glanced up, startled. Was that meant for her? Later, just before the first dance, Thomas found her again near the bar. "I need 5 minutes," he said. "Follow me." They slipped through the crowd and into the hallway that led to the gallery room, an art-filled chamber Liliana's parents had curated. It was empty now, the music faint in the background. "I kept waiting for you to say something," Thomas said finally. "All these years I kept hoping." Adriana's breath caught. "Hoping for what?" "For you to stop me," he said. "To tell me I was with the wrong person, to tell me it was you." She stared at him, heart roaring in her ears. "Why didn't you tell me that?" "Because you looked happy for me. Because I thought maybe I was imagining it." Adriana's voice shook. "You were." The silence between them was alive, heavy with all the almosts, and then he stepped closer. And before she could stop herself, before she could rationalize or retreat, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not gentle, it was not rehearsed. It was years of longing breaking the dam, years of buried hope erupting like a scream. And then it was over. He stepped back, stunned. She whispered goodbye and turned to leave. But as she walked out into the night, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. The goodbye that refused to end. Adriana walked out into the night with the taste of his kiss still clinging to her lips like a curse, not a memory. The cold evening air bit at her skin, but she didn't care. The lake reflected the glittering lights of the reception behind her, a mirror to a world that no longer felt like hers. She walked faster, heels sinking into the soft earth beneath the trees that lined the path away from the celebration. Music spilled faintly through the open ballroom doors behind her, an elegant jazz tune that only made her feel more misplaced, like an understudy who never belonged in the spotlight. Her chest burned, but her eyes stayed dry. She wouldn't cry here, not where they could find her, not where they might try to understand what had just happened when even she couldn't. How do you name a moment that isn't supposed to exist? That kiss, that 5-second rebellion, had been born from a decade of longing, a decade of restraint. It was never meant to survive in daylight. It was a secret meant to burn quietly in the dark corners of her memory, not erupt into reality at the edge of a wedding. But now it was real, and now Adriana couldn't go back. She reached the side terrace where no guests wandered, her hands clutching the railing as if it might stop her world from spinning. Her breaths came in quiet gasps, but her thoughts screamed. She had kissed Thomas, on his wedding day, after he said, "I do." What had she done? What had she just destroyed? Behind her, the sound of footsteps shattered the stillness. She turned sharply, expecting Thomas, expecting accusations or heartbreak or maybe another kiss. But it wasn't him. It was Liliana. Her veil was gone. Her perfect smile was gone. She stood barefoot on the gravel, her wedding heels dangling from her hand, hair slightly undone, eyes wide with something that wasn't anger. Not yet. "I saw you," she said softly, her voice trembling like a glass about to shatter. "I saw you kiss him." Adriana's lips parted, but no words came out. What could she possibly say? What language could explain a decade of buried feelings, a love so quietly lived it became indistinguishable from pain? Liliana stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold. Was it the first time? Yes, Adriana whispered, because lying felt crueler than truth now. Liliana studied her, not with rage, but with the slow dawning of betrayal. But not the first time you wanted to. Adriana shook her head, finally letting her tears spill. No, it was. The silence between them stretched until it became unbearable. Liliana blinked hard, then turned away, walking slowly back toward the building, her figure glowing under the string lights. She didn't scream. She didn't slap her. That would have been easier. Instead, she just disappeared back into the celebration that had now become a graveyard for every version of their friendship. Adriana stood there until the music stopped, until the laughter quieted, until the lights dimmed. She didn't go back inside. She couldn't. She walked the entire length of the property to where her small rental car was parked between a limousine and a luxury SUV. Her fingers trembled as she turned the keys in the ignition, and the engine's soft purr felt like a whisper telling her to run. And so she did. She didn't even change out of the dress. For 3 days, Adriana didn't leave her apartment. She didn't check social media. She didn't open messages. She ignored her ringing phone. She simply curled up in bed with her sketchbook pressed to her chest like a lifeline, unable to draw, unable to think beyond the echo of his hands on her waist and Liliana's broken voice whispering, "I saw you." On the 4th morning, her doorbell rang. She ignored it. Then it rang again and again. Finally, dragging her aching body from the bed, she opened the door. It was Thomas. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His tie was gone. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes, those eyes that used to hold the world, were now rimmed with red. "Can I come in?" he asked. She hesitated, then stepped aside. He stood in the middle of her living room, looking smaller than she remembered, like the weight of his choices had shrunk him. "Liliana left the reception 2 hours after you did," he said. "She told her parents she needed space. I haven't seen her since." Adriana sat on the arm of her couch, arms wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm not," he said. "I should be, but I'm not." She looked up at him, eyes wide with disbelief. "I think I got married because I thought it was the right thing to do," he said slowly. "Because everyone said Liliana was perfect, and because I kept waiting for you to tell me not to, but you didn't, and I didn't know how to say it first." Adriana stood. "You can't say this now, Thomas. You married her." "I know," he said, tears forming. "But I also know that I've loved you longer than I've admitted, even to myself. You were always there. Every important moment it was you. I just thought you didn't feel the same." She laughed bitterly, wiping her face. "I was there, yes. I was there through your wins, your failures, your dreams, and every one of your relationships. And I stayed quiet because I thought that's what love was, staying even when it breaks you." Thomas moved toward her, "And I thought you were just too good for me to risk losing." They stood inches apart. And then she stepped back. "No," she said, voice steady now. "You don't get to choose me because you're afraid. You chose her. You stood in front of everyone and made a vow. You kissed me after the fact, not before. So whatever we were, it can't begin like this." He opened his mouth, but she held up her hand. "Go fix your marriage, or don't. But don't come here hoping I'll be your escape. I'm not a detour from your life, Thomas. I was supposed to be your home, but you never walked through the door." Thomas stood there, silent. He nodded slowly like a man finally waking from a dream, and then he turned and left. Adriana collapsed into the couch as the door shut, letting the silence wrap around her like a shroud. This was the real goodbye. Not the one at the wedding. Not the one under the stars. But this one where truth was laid bare and choices were made. She wept, but beneath the sorrow was something else. A flicker. A beginning. Maybe not of a love story, but of her own. What comes after goodbye? 3 weeks had passed since the wedding, 21 long, silent days that crawled across Adriana's calendar like ink bleeding through tissue paper. The world outside her apartment window had begun to thaw into early spring, but inside, the frost still clung to her ribs. Her days were filled with silence. No calls from Thomas, no messages from Liliana, and no noise from within herself except for the relentless looping of memories she had tried and failed to repress. The kiss, the confession, the confrontation. It all lived inside her now like a ghost that refused to be buried. Yet something strange had started to happen. She found herself reaching for the sketchpad again, at first only to fill time. But slowly the lines stopped shaking. Slowly the pages came alive again. She began sketching a woman, her own reflection at first, but bolder, freer, standing on a mountaintop, wind in her hair, untethered to anyone's shadow. The drawings spilled from her like confessions. She filled 3 entire journals in 10 days, each one a map of her grief, her guilt, and most unexpectedly, her growing clarity. One morning, Adriana found herself staring into her bathroom mirror longer than usual. Her reflection looked unfamiliar, but not in a bad way. There was something in her eyes now, something resilient, something like defiance. She wasn't the same woman who sat in the church pew clutching a bouquet of peonies as the man she loved kissed someone else. That woman had wept herself dry. This woman, she had survived the drought. And then the knock came. Not on her door, on her email inbox. Subject line, "Let's talk. Liliana." Adriana froze. Her heart kicked into a run. She stared at the screen for nearly 10 minutes before clicking it. "Hi, Adriana. I understand if you never want to speak to me again. But I need to say something. In person, please, just one coffee, then you never have to see me again." L. Adriana stared at the blinking cursor, fingers hovering over the keys. Every instinct told her to delete it. She owed this woman nothing. But another part of her, tired, older, wiser, knew closure had a cost, and running from it never made it disappear. After a deep breath, she typed a single word. "Okay." They met at a small cafe tucked between 2 bookstores on the west side, the kind of place with scratched wooden tables and lopsided art hanging from the walls. Liliana was already there when Adriana arrived, dressed not like the luminous bride from a magazine cover, but like a woman who had cried herself empty too many nights to bother with mascara. Her eyes met Adriana's as she sat down across from her, and to both their surprise, the silence didn't explode. It settled. "I didn't come to accuse you," Liliana said after a long sip of black coffee. "I came to tell you the truth." Adriana folded her hands. "Okay." "I left him the night of the wedding," Liliana said, "but not because of the kiss." Adriana blinked. "You said you saw us." "I did," Liliana nodded. "But that wasn't the real betrayal. It was what came before. It was every moment he looked at you like you were his son, and at me like I was the moon trying to borrow light. I knew it long before that night. I just thought I could change it, that I could earn his heart with time." Adriana said nothing. She had no defense, no justification, only breath. "I don't hate you, Adri," Liliana whispered. "I think I just envy you. You had him in a way I never did, even if he didn't know it." Adriana's throat tightened. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Liliana smiled, a soft, sad curve. "That's the thing about love. It doesn't care what you mean, it only cares what you do." For a while they just sat there, 2 women bound by the same man, both mourning different versions of him. When they stood to leave, Liliana extended her hand. Adriana took it. "This isn't forgiveness," Liliana said. "It's peace, there's a difference." And with that, she walked away. Adriana stood there long after the door closed behind her, the noise of the cafe slowly returning to fill the void Liliana left. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was something better, truth, and with truth she could finally breathe again. Weeks turned to months. Adriana didn't hear from Thomas. She assumed he had gone away to some retreat or maybe back to Silicon Valley to bury himself in work. She no longer checked his social media, no longer flinched at the mention of his name in tech headlines. The ache had dulled. Not disappeared, but changed shape like sea glass, still sharp in memory, but smoother now, beautiful even. She poured herself into her art. She rented a small studio space downtown and began working on her first solo exhibit, one that explored heartbreak as transformation, using mixed media to capture the journey from longing to liberation. She called it "Things I Didn't Say." The opening night was quiet. A dozen visitors drifted in, admiring her work, asking questions. An agent approached her, curious about a partnership. An old professor congratulated her on the courage it took to create such raw, honest pieces, but Adriana wasn't listening to any of them. Because he was there. Thomas, standing at the edge of the room, hands buried in the pockets of a navy peacoat, eyes fixed on the largest piece in the gallery. A canvas that showed a woman standing at the edge of a dock, hair flying, dress torn, heart open. She walked toward him slowly, unsure of what she wanted to say, if anything. He turned as she approached, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. Not as friends, not as almost lovers, but as people who had walked through fire and somehow found their own skin on the other side. "You came," she finally said. "I had to," he replied. "I saw your name in an article about the gallery and you wanted to see if I'd survived you." He winced. "No, I knew you would, I just wanted to see how." Adriana nodded, her voice calmer than she expected. "It wasn't easy, but it was worth it." He glanced back at the painting. "That piece, it's you, isn't it?" "It's all me," she said. "Every inch of this gallery is a version of myself I had to forgive." Thomas turned to face her. "I didn't come here to reopen anything, Adri. I just wanted to say thank you for loving me when I didn't deserve it, for letting me go when I didn't know I needed to be set free." Adriana smiled, but there was no bitterness in it now. "And thank you for finally seeing me, even if it was too late." He nodded. They didn't hug, they didn't cry, they didn't promise to stay in touch. Instead, he turned, walked to the door, and left quietly. Adriana watched him disappear into the night, her heart steady this time. It didn't shatter, it did ache, it simply beat, strong, whole, her own. For the first time in a long time, Adriana didn't feel like the maid of honor in someone else's story. She felt like the bride of her own becoming. The woman in the gallery window. The gallery had closed for the night, but the paintings still seemed to breathe in the dark. Adriana sat alone in the center of the room, a half-empty wine glass on the bench beside her, the silence humming with stories told and untold. The air still carried the faint scent of lavender and dust, and her shoes echoed quietly every time she shifted her weight. Though her exhibit had technically ended 2 weeks ago, the owner allowed her to linger in the space a while longer, said the walls liked her energy, that her presence gave the room weight. She wasn't sure about that, but she welcomed the stillness. After everything, silence was no longer her enemy. It had become her mirror. She was thinking of the painting that started it all, the woman on the dock, back to the world, heart visible even without a face. That image had been drawn on a night she couldn't sleep, when grief had mixed with clarity and tears soaked the edges of her sketchpad. She had painted it with her palms, not brushes, because the pain needed to be touched, not mediated. Now it hung on the far wall like a scar she was proud to show. That piece had become the center of her healing, and strangely, the beginning of something she hadn't seen coming. It had happened the day after Thomas visited. She had been cleaning up the display, lifting the tape from the baseboards, when a woman entered the gallery alone, stopping in front of the dock painting. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, unmoving. Then softly she said, "This is the first time I've ever seen myself on a wall." Adriana turned, caught off guard. "I'm sorry," she asked. The woman smiled. She was in her mid-30s, tall, mocha-skinned, with cropped curls and eyes full of stories. "That painting," she said, pointing gently. "It's how I've felt for years, torn between staying and running, but always standing still, hoping someone might see." Adriana set her tools down and crossed the room. "It was how I felt too," she said quietly. The woman nodded. "Then you understand." They stood there for a while, letting the silence say what neither of them had the vocabulary for. Then the woman offered her hand. "I'm Noel." "Adriana," she replied. And just like that, something shifted. Noel came back to the gallery the next day, and the next, and soon they were drinking coffee on the gallery steps, watching the sun pour onto the pavement in broken streams. Noel was a poet, working quietly for a publishing house and writing under a pseudonym. Her words were soft weapons, precise, delicate, and devastating. She shared a few with Adriana, and they felt like bandages being gently pressed onto wounds she hadn't realized were still open. They didn't talk about relationships at first. They talked about art and language, about grief and mothers, about what it meant to disappear inside someone else's life and try to remember your own shape afterward. Noel never asked about Thomas, and Adriana never asked about the sadness that sometimes stole over Noel's features when she thought no one was looking. And maybe that was why it felt safe. It was only weeks later, as they were walking home after a bookstore reading, that Adriana realized the safety she felt in Noel's presence was different from anything she had known with Thomas. Thomas had been a storm she chased, a fire she thought she could contain. But Noel was a quiet room, a warm towel after the rain. She didn't demand anything. She simply existed beside her, and somehow that felt more intimate than 1,000 whispered confessions. One evening, Adriana invited Noel to her apartment for tea. They sat on the floor, surrounded by canvases and unfinished works, sipping from chipped mugs and trading stories about their worst dates. Noel laughed, a deep, full-bodied sound that warmed the room, and Adriana found herself watching the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled. "Do you ever think we wait too long?" Adriana asked suddenly. "To say something?" Noel asked in return. Adriana nodded. Noel looked at her for a long moment. "All the time," she said. Silence fell between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged. And then, gently, carefully, Adriana reached out and tucked a strand of Noel's hair behind her ear. It was a small gesture, almost nothing, but Noel didn't flinch. She leaned into it. "I don't want to wait too long this time," Adriana whispered. Noel reached for her hand and held it. "Then don't." It was not a declaration. It wasn't dramatic. It was a beginning. And this time, Adriana didn't feel like she was stealing anything. She didn't feel like an intruder in someone else's story. She felt seen, chosen, free. The days that followed were filled with moments that didn't rush or chase. They were quiet, slow, deliberate. Noel didn't press for definitions. Adriana didn't draw borders around her heart. They met in the middle, in that delicate space where healing becomes hope. Adriana began to create again, not just for survival, but for joy. She painted laughter, vulnerability, intimacy. She painted a series of faceless women dancing barefoot in fields, twirling under starlight, running down city streets with wind in their hair. They were fragments of herself, yes, but also pieces of Noel. When she showed them to her, Noel cried, not because they were perfect, but because they were real. Then one night, Adriana received a call from an art journal editor. Her exhibit had been selected for a national feature. The woman on the dock was going to grace the cover of their spring issue. They wanted an interview, a photo, a quote about where the painting had come from. She stared at the phone after hanging up, stunned. Her pain, the very thing that had almost destroyed her, had been transformed into art that moved people. She had bled on the canvas, and now the world wanted to frame it. Noel sat beside her as she shared the news, pride radiating from her smile. "You deserve this," she said. Adriana looked at her, something rising in her chest like warmth through cold hands. "Do you think heartbreak makes us better artists?" Noel shook her head. "No, I think surviving heartbreak makes us better humans. The art just follows." Adriana leaned into her. "You make me believe again." Noel kissed her forehead. "You did the hard part on your own. I'm just here to witness it." And maybe that was it. Maybe that's what love really was. Not someone who rescued you, but someone who saw you rise from the ruins and said, "I'll walk with you the rest of the way." Closure is always the end. Spring had ripened into early summer by the time Adriana received the letter. It arrived in an envelope that was slightly crumpled at the corners, its surface hand-addressed in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting. Small, careful, just slightly slanted to the right the way he always wrote when trying to be precise. She hadn't heard from him in over 2 months. Not since he walked out of the gallery and disappeared back into whatever world had claimed him after the fallout. Not since she had let go, not just of him, but of the weight of waiting. And now, with Noel's laughter woven into her life like the quiet rhythm of a song she never wanted to end, this letter felt like a forgotten echo from another lifetime, one she was no longer sure she wanted to revisit. Still, she didn't open it immediately. She laid it on her kitchen table beside her tea and the half-finished sketch of 2 women leaning forehead to forehead on a park bench. The drawing had been inspired by a Sunday morning with Noel, a slow, golden kind of morning with books open between them and sunlight in their laps. Adriana had begun drawing it not to capture the moment, but to thank it. To remember that peace could be profound. That love didn't have to come with lightning bolts or pain. It could arrive in the form of hands held during thunderstorms, or someone knowing just how you like your coffee before you even ask. The letter sat untouched for a day, then 2. By the 3rd, curiosity gave way to courage and she opened it. "Dear Adriana, I've rewritten this letter 6 times, and every version has started the same way. I'm sorry. But that's not enough. So let me begin differently by telling you what I never had the courage to say aloud. I loved you, I still do, but I understand now that love isn't always enough, not when it arrives too late, not when it's drenched in guilt. I hurt you by choosing silence when I should have chosen honesty. I hurt you by assuming you'd always be there, even if I never gave you the space to be more than just a friend. And on the day of my wedding, when you kissed me, I realized something I should have faced years ago. You were never invisible. I just didn't know how to deserve you. Liliana and I have annulled the marriage. We both agreed it wasn't built on truth. I think we both wanted to be someone we weren't, people who could pretend love was clean and convenient. I'm not writing to ask for a second chance. I don't want to interrupt whatever you've built since we last spoke. I just needed to give you something I never did, closure that's clean. Not ripped open by moments of confusion, not left to rot in unspoken questions. You made me a better man, Adri. And now I want to be the kind of man who lets the woman he loves go without strings. With gratitude and goodbye. Thomas. Adriana read the letter twice, then set it down. Her hands didn't shake, her heart didn't race. Instead, there was a strange lightness inside her chest, as if something old had finally unclenched. It wasn't the kind of closure wrapped in fairy tales or dramatic gestures. It was real, it was raw, and more importantly, it asked for nothing in return. She stepped out onto her balcony, the warm breeze brushing over her skin. Down below, the city hummed with life, buses groaning, children laughing, a guitarist playing something soft at the corner cafe. She could hear the notes drifting upward, and in them she heard herself, whole, grounded, ready. Later that evening, she showed Noel the letter. She didn't have to, but she wanted to. Noel read it in silence, then folded the paper with a delicate kind of respect. "How do you feel?" she asked gently. "Lighter," Adriana answered truthfully. "Not because he finally loved me, but because I finally loved myself enough to let him go." Noel reached for her hand, her thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You didn't choose the easier path, Adri, but you chose the truer one." They stayed quiet for a moment, watching the sun bleed into the horizon, painting the sky in orange and lavender. The same colors Adriana had once chosen for Liliana's wedding bouquet. Funny how colors stayed with you even after people left. Funny how healing came not as a thunderclap, but a quiet decision made over and over, each day. Weeks passed. The article in the National Art Journal came out, and Adriana's inbox flooded with gallery invitations, commission requests, and interview offers. She accepted some, declined others. Fame was never the goal. She wanted to create, to connect, to heal through every stroke of the brush and word of truth she put into the world. Her next exhibit was titled Soft Armor, a visual journey through vulnerability and the courage it takes to open your heart again after it's been shattered. Noel, ever her quiet companion, wrote a companion poetry chapbook for the exhibit. It sold out in 3 days. They weren't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, days when Adriana wondered whether she'd ever completely stop wondering what could have been. But those thoughts didn't hurt anymore. They simply reminded her that love, true love, isn't always about getting the story you wanted. Sometimes it's about finding the strength to rewrite the ending in your own handwriting. And she was finally doing just that. She wrote the ending in her own name. The sky above the vineyard shimmered with late September gold, rows of grapevines curling gently down the slope, kissed by light and silence. It had been 3 months since Adriana's exhibit Soft Armor had opened, and though the city still buzzed with her name in gallery halls and art blogs, she had deliberately chosen to step away from it all, just for a while. She and Noel had rented a quiet cottage an hour outside of town, a space tucked between nature and time, where the only music came from the birds overhead and the steady rhythm of their own breathing. The walls of the cottage were plain, but the love inside them was bright. It spilled into the kitchen during lazy breakfasts, into the evenings as they read by firelight, and into Adriana's newest canvases, paintings no one had seen yet, paintings not made for galleries but for her. She had painted Noel asleep, her curls wild on the pillow, lips parted slightly in that vulnerable space between breath and dreaming. She had painted their shadows entwined on the cottage floor, caught in a midday sunbeam. She had painted her own reflection, but not as a broken girl standing in the wings. This time she was centered, standing tall, eyes forward, unapologetic. It was the first self-portrait she had ever made. One afternoon, as Noel read aloud from a book of Ada Limon poems, Adriana sat by the open window, sketching the hillside, the valley, the light. The wind carried the faint scent of rosemary, and everything felt impossibly still and whole. She didn't expect the knock on the door. She didn't expect the past to find her again. Noel opened it. "Are you Adriana Lewis?" a voice asked politely. "Yes," Adriana said, stepping forward cautiously. The woman at the door was older, maybe in her late 50s, wearing a crisp navy suit and holding a small envelope. "I'm from the Avery Family Foundation," she said. "Mr. Thomas Avery asked me to deliver this personally. He's recently launched a project supporting women artists across the country and wanted you to be the first to know." Adriana took the envelope, I haven't spoken to him since, her voice trailed off. The woman smiled kindly. He said he didn't expect you to reply. He just wanted you to know that what you built, the art, the truth, it changed him. He's dedicating this project in honor of a woman who taught him how to see the world differently. Adriana stood silent for a moment, fingers curled gently around the envelope, heart steady, not shaken. Thank you, she said softly. The woman nodded and left. Adriana didn't open the letter, she didn't need to. This time it wasn't about closure. It wasn't even about acknowledgement. It was about legacy, his, yes, but also hers, the ripple her pain had become. The quiet revolution of a woman who stayed, healed, created, and loved again. That evening she and Noel sat on the porch beneath the velvet dusk. Fireflies blinked in the distance. Noel leaned against her shoulder. You okay? She asked. Adriana nodded. Better than okay, I'm me. Noel kissed her temple. I hope you know how rare that is, to choose yourself, not just once but every day. Adriana turned to her. I didn't before. I thought love was about holding on no matter the cost. But now I know. It's about letting go when it no longer holds you gently. It's about staying only where your heart has room to grow. They sat there for a long time, not speaking, not needing to. Around them the world quieted. Above them stars began to bloom. The next morning Adriana woke before dawn. She padded barefoot to the small studio she'd set up beside the kitchen where a blank canvas waited. This one was different. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't bleeding. It was a soft beginning, a quiet blooming. She dipped her brush into a pale yellow and began with light, just light. Then she painted a figure standing at the edge of a vineyard, wrapped not in regret, not in ache, but in something softer, something like strength. And beneath the painting, in her elegant handwriting, she wrote one word. Becoming. Because that's what it had always been about. Not the kiss, not the heartbreak, not even the love. But the woman who emerged from all of it. Whole, unashamed, free.